Collective intent and collective identity, a positive feedback loop.
Just like you can't have a green forest without green trees, you can't have world peace without peaceful people.
What 100 monkeys can tell you about group thought.
Ooh. All right, all together now.
Intention is not something that we do, but something we connect to. Carlos Castaneda.
Welcome to the Epoch Podcast, your weekly dose of mental foreplay. My name's Matt.
I'm Austin.
I'm Joni.
I'm Christina.
And I'm David.
And this week's conversation worth having is about the idea of collective intent on a large level. So take it away, David.
Well, originally I had thought it had been something that had been bouncing around in my head. The whole idea of contrasting the colonization of Central and South America with the colonization of North America, and I in the article I'm going to write about this, it was kind of funny because once I started studying about this, or let me just put the idea out there. The original hypothesis that I had was that the reason why, I probably shouldn't put it in these terms, but the reason why that Latin America right now is so effed up, or there's so much crap going on there, is because of the way that it was originally colonized. The Spaniards came. Basically, what they wanted to do was originally find a way to get to India. And they originally thought that they had gone to India, henceforth the name Indians, which is probably breaking some sort of PC some for other. But yeah.
Indigenous peoples? Come on, David.
Yeah. They called the indigenous people Indians. But anyway.
This is historically accurate. It's okay.
So far, so good. And so what they ended up, once they realized that this was a new place, hey, let's find gold and let's try to get as much gold as we can, and gold. And so basically that started what a lot of people would call the rape of America, where they got any sort of basically valuable thing that they could carry and carried it back to Spain. And that's how Latin America and South America started. Whereas originally in the U.S., they had tried to come over basically for gold, but ended up with a bunch of people that came over for religious reasons. And that's how America started. That, they originally came here for gold and stuff, and ended up with people that moved here because they wanted religious freedom, and so they, let's just say, for as far as intention goes, the intention of colonization here in the States was somewhat more noble. So after doing some research, I think it was grossly simplified or oversimplified of me, but we can have that conversation if we want. But that was the concept. So yeah, I don't know. That's where I started. Did anybody find anything that somewhat would corroborate that or go along those lines? Did I make myself clear?
Well, I think it's definitely an interesting concept, and I think, just real quick, a fun book on the pre-Columbus Americas is 1491 by Charles C. Mann. Really cool book, but that's all I got on that, on the historical aspect of it, because so much of what we've learned about the history prior to European arrival is vastly different than what a lot of anthropological evidence suggests. So, archaeological. I don't remember the difference between the two. Oftentimes, I just remember Indiana Jones. Like, we're good.
I think it's worth noting for the audience that David, you grew up. Well, you were born in Costa Rica.
No, actually, I was born in Texas.
But you grew up most of your.
I was born in Texas. No,
you spent many years in Costa Rica.
my mom is Costa Rican, so I'm half Costa Rican.
Okay.
I spent the first 20 years of my life in Costa Rica, which is in Central America.
So
I've
you're
already.
so you're not speaking as an American who's never been down to South America and going,
No,
man,
no.
these things are effed up. Like it's
I mean-
from experience that the culture and the results of hundreds of years of living with an intention have
Yeah.
created a vastly different trajectory for these different regions of the world.
Yeah, and I actually spent 2 years. I studied law in Costa Rica for 2 years, so it wasn't just, this wasn't just whatever that I heard wherever. It was like the higher education, maybe, if you want to call it that, whatever. But yeah, so I got this vibe from stuff, from living there, from my experience. I would come here versus go over there. Why is there so much trash all over the place? Why do people not care about the place as much? Come over here, wow, this is so clean, this is so nice. What, the differences are staggering. You go into a Latin American country, you cross the dang border and you're like, holy crap, what's going on here?
There's an energetic difference, no doubt. And I do think it's, this podcast largely focuses on the digital age and everything has changed. And we have grown up essentially with the internet and video games and TV and airplanes and all that stuff. So it's kind of hard, or it's kind of easy to overlook just how much of a role the original intent of the European invasion of the Americas played in developing the cultures that we now see. Because right now it's easy to go, well, I mean, tomato, the world is a much smaller place and cultures are, old cultures are dying and now there's a whole new world of kind of all this mix of the melting pot. And yes, that is the truth of today, but it is very easy again to underestimate just how important that original intent was to see the cultural differences that you're talking about. And I thought it was, when you originally posed that hypothesis, I thought, that's actually really intent and intention. And I'm sure this podcast will go further down a more spiritual path or whatever. But it was an interesting thing I never thought of what, when you look at it on that scale, the intent of settling an entire continent, a couple continents, and the difference in those continents over time there's a few things you could point to, but I definitely think the intent is one of the massive ones that gets overlooked for whatever reason. So I thought it was a good hypothesis, and I enjoyed kind of thinking about it in a way that I never have before.
Yeah, I think one of the things that stuck out for me in the pre-show meeting when you were kind of pitching this idea was when you were talking about, because you guys move around a lot, you live in different places, and you said you pulled into the neighborhood and you saw like bikes hanging out in front yards and maybe some toys here and there, and you're like, dude, down in Latin America, like this stuff would not be here. Like if it's not put away, it's not cared for. It's mine now. Like that Saturday Night Live skit, like it's mine now.
Well, even okay, throwing the monkey wrench into the situation here. Actually, upon doing, the reason why I said it was oversimplified was upon doing some research in this, I found that the whole concept of the rape of America, the plundering of America by the Spaniards, is somewhat of a construct that was made by political rivals, by mainly like the people I listened to mainly were saying that it was made by the French and by the English because they were rival empires, if you will, of Spain. And so once that took, and then there was also like a monarchy change. They went from the Habsburgs to the Bourbons. Does anybody know? I can't remember.
I like bourbon.
I think it's Bourbons. Whatever.
I
But
like Pittsburgh.
in the transition, that from the last Habsburg king to the new Bourbon king in the monarchy, that they had to basically do a campaign with the people of Spain in order to because the Bourbons were of French origin, so had to make a campaign with the people of Spain in order to make themselves look better and the old Habsburg king look worse. And so that kind of went into it, with the Habsburgs. They brutalized America. They treated the Aboriginal people like crap, and so on and so forth. And everything was a complete crap show in the country, et cetera, et cetera. And so that was one of the things that they just came up as a as a thing. And so it's actually there is a term for it, and it's the Black Legend, which is the legend that the Spaniards were idiots, that they had no abilities whatsoever. They were basically militarized monkeys, if you will, that went to America and just killed everything and everybody and hurt the Aboriginal people, and basically just completely took a crap on America and took all the things of value back to Spain. And the funny thing and the crazy thing is that I grew up with that, and everything that I studied and heard about when I was growing up was the fact that the Spaniards did this. When in fact, there are numerous examples of the fact that the Spaniards were actually completely the opposite. One of them being that the population of the Americas right now, of Latin America and South America, is largely a mix of Spaniard and indigenous people. And if you think about that, what the one lady that was talking about it was saying, she said the Spaniards were automatically seen as a contaminated race from the get-go because they had Arab, Spain was basically an Arab property, colony for 400 or 500 years before. Actually, in 1492 was when Spain went back to gaining their independence. So as soon as Spain gained their independence, then Columbus found the New World, et cetera, et cetera. But Spain, they had intermixed with, they had Arab blood, they had Jewish blood in the population, and then when they came over here to the Americas, and they basically intermixed with the Aboriginal people. So Latin America has a lot of native blood, if you will, because the Spaniards intermixed with the American people and didn't think anything of it. Whereas here in the States, if you look at the population, most of us are German or English or whatever.
What you're trying to say is less mixed, right?
Less mixed. And so what I ended up thinking about it, instead of being an intent thing, it's more of a belief thing. Because this lie that the Spaniards were like this and so on and so forth, I am going to reference to the last podcast that we did on political correctness, and the whole thing with Marxism needs to have an oppressor and an oppressee. And I think that that's what hit Latin America hard. And if you look, there is a lot of communism in America. Cuba, Venezuela, Bolivia, or I think at one time, all of these peoples had some sort of socialism / communism / whatever ideas. Communism was super, super, super ingrained in Costa Rica. Like, my mom was a communist growing up. She almost went to Russia to study. And instead of it, instead of it being a thing of, hey, the Spaniard, instead of it being, lost my train of thought. Instead of it being a thing of intent from the original intent, if you will, it's actually a thing of, they looked at this revision of history, if you will. And I'm not saying that, that the Spaniards were justified in what they did, but it was the basic principle of conquering another nation in the 1500s. You're not going to reproach the Romans for the way that they treated all the countries, or all the nations that they took over in the beginning, even though a lot of people say, hey, the Romans were so great because they let people have freedom of religion and so on and so forth. Whereas, the Spaniards basically somewhat did the same thing, even though they tried to proselytize all the native peoples. But I feel like it's more of a thing that, a lot of toxic ideas latched onto this oppressor-oppressee idea here, that the Aboriginal people were so repressed and hurt and abused and so on and so forth, and created that notion that, hey, we're owed something because, XYZ, and the Spaniards were oppressing us and hurting us and destroying or whatever, where in fact it might have been a lot less than people think, and it might be something that is somewhat of a crutch nowadays.
Well, to me, that makes me think like, okay, so the difference between subconscious versus conscious intention, because all of that, all the beliefs play into your subconscious intentions. And so, I think that's a discussion in itself of how your subconscious plays into everything.
And it's an idea. If you look in, what's the biggest thing that people think about when they think about Latin American politics? Corruption. And it's the concept, hey, I'm in this place where I can get mine, and I'm gonna get it, and I don't care who I have to screw over. And it's not just, people rail against the politicians and they're corrupt and they're horrible, but if you would be in the same place, you would do the same thing.
So basically what you're saying is the U.S. is a lot better at lying. Right? Because we don't have corruption in our politics. Our politicians are super good. And our intentions for this country were super pure and spiritual.
Well, this is borne out in the video game industry because, Tropico is like, half a dozen series video games where you go and become a corrupt politician in Latin America. That you don't have that option for video games to play in the United States.
Wow. Well, so basically what you're saying is that your original hypothesis is officially debunked.
Somewhat, yes.
Well,
there's still,
Well,
sort of yes, sort of no.
but that's why I'm saying that subconscious thing, because whether or not, well, and at the same time, like, they were still making conscious choices about how they progressed as a country, right?
Yeah. See, the thing is, like, I also listened to this one. It's fascinating how many interesting lectures there are online in Spanish. But this other guy, I think his name is Armando del Torre. He made the point. The reason why Latin America is where it is right now is not because of this whole or not because of the way it was conquered, but he said, but because of who they listened to. And he made the point, Argentina had the fourth best economy coming out of World War II.
Oh, that's crazy.
Like, it must have been the U.S. and then Argentina. And he said they had the fourth best economy, but then and it was like Argentina, like the top. What did he say? The richest countries in Latin America coming out of World War II were Argentina and Cuba and a couple other, in Uruguay and something else. Coming out of World War II, like you look at Cuba, and he says, you look at these countries and you're like, their economies were so great, and then who did they start listening to? And then, well, we all know where Cuba is right now, but he said, like, he made the point with Argentina, like they listened to, they had this one dictator, Perón, and he basically, his policies were like very, very socialistic. Let's get a bunch of free crap for everybody, and it kind of went,
But it wasn't real socialism. Sorry, that's a libertarian.
I've heard that line.
Sarcastic. Oh my gosh.
I don't know if he was. Yeah, I don't know if he was quite. Well, I don't know. It's
no,
really
it was
hard.
real socialism.
Really,
socialism sucks. Let's just be honest.
right. Yeah. I'm not sure he was socialist though, because, or maybe he was. I don't know. The thing is, it's really hard in Costa Rica because, like, or in Latin America, because all these ideologies, they're more center, and so I had to, like, I didn't know. I never really understood. Okay, so there aren't like true Republicans or true Democrats. Everything is like, socialism and socialism light and socialism lighter. Basically, But anyways.
Well, thanks for the history lesson.
Well, yeah.
So the real answer is not original intent. It is socialism/communism ruins everything it touches.
Well, I think more than anything is the victim mentality ruins everything it touches.
Yeah.
Because I feel like it's very, being in the victim mentality makes you an easy prey for ideas that make it us versus them. And even if it's not necessarily a socialistic idea, it's still going to be, oh, look at those rich people over there. Which, I mean, if you're honest, yeah, it's basically socialism because it's always the rich are the oppressors. But the victim mentality is always going to find somebody to blame for your crap instead of yourself. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like that's, you look at the differences and you're going to say, hey, it started with the Spaniards and they oppressed us, and now the rich oppress us, and so on and so forth.
I think this plays right into my intro, just the idea that collective intent and collective identity are a positive feedback loop. So, yeah, because just sounds like, where does our intent come from? And it's coming from out of our identity. So if you have an identity of a victim, then your intent is going to be based along those lines, and you're going to collectively create a culture. And that culture is going to perpetuate that identity. It's going to perpetuate that intent, and it's just going to keep going. It might go in weird directions, might really amp it up, but it's gonna perpetuate it.
So I found an interesting experiment that was done in the 50s in Japan, and this is called the 100th monkey syndrome. And I think it plays into a little bit of what you were talking about. So it was 1952 in Japan. It was one of the islands off Japan. Researchers were studying these snow monkeys, and they would feed them sweet potatoes, throw the sweet potatoes in the sand, monkeys would come and eat them. Well, finally one day one, and incidentally enough, it was a young one, an 18-month-old monkey, took it and washed it off first instead of eating the sand. And they thought that was interesting. It's the first time a monkey had ever done that. And they watched these monkeys for the next 6 years, and slowly this started to catch on. And they noticed it was the young one sharing it with his friends, these ones sharing it with their parents, and gradually, not all of them, but most of them were starting to wash the sand off their food. At the end of 6 years, there were still some, especially older ones, interestingly enough, that didn't catch on to it. But they were watching them, and they said it came down to, they call the 100th monkey. I don't think they actually counted them. they said the 100th monkey went and washed it. And then literally in 24 hours, all the monkeys were washing their food. And that's not even the best part. The best part is a whole island away, the monkeys started doing it. Literally within 24 hours.
So it took 6 years to go from 1 to the 100th.
Right.
And then from 100th to all the monkeys, it took one day.
Literally overnight.
Wow.
Monkeys that had no contact with each other. The researchers hadn't done anything with them. And so it's this idea that there's this group consciousness, there's this subconscious moving, that all of a sudden you get to this critical mass and it flips a switch. And if you can see it in monkeys, and it was a behavioral thing, not just you can kind of think that with a mindset, group consciousness and victim mentality. This was actually like a physical thing they were doing. I was blown away by that.
That's crazy.
That's super interesting, and the interesting twist on it for me is because I'm familiar with the story, but your source sounds a little more legit than mine. Mine was kind of at the end of a documentary called Collapse, featured Michael Ruppert, and the difference being is that he said it was coconuts, not sweet potatoes. So I'm curious. You said it was from
There is a little bit of legend around it, and I think it's because it wasn't their intention to do this as a study. This was just kind of a byproduct of them studying the monkeys, and it was in the 50s, so it wasn't super, and it was in Japan, so it wasn't super well documented. So there are some variations of the story, but I think the concept holds true, that there's something going on in the unseen realm that you can get to a critical mass, and all of a sudden a whole country switches. And now they're all believing one thing. You can get to a point, you've seen this in innovation,
right?
And the whole thing with believing we could fly. And then, or the, was it the 900-pound, what was the weight limit?
Oh,
600, I think.
Yeah, 600 pounds, man can't lift over 600 pounds.
Yeah, and this guy was literally tricked into lifting 601 pounds. And then all of a sudden he broke this barrier, and now people could start lifting. And now they lift way more than that. So there's these barriers in this group consciousness and this thing that goes around that affects groups. That was really, really fascinating to me.
I found a list. I didn't look it up for this podcast, but there's a list out there of like major inventions that kind of changed world history. I know one of them is the radio waves and everything like that Marconi and Tesla were both inventing it secretly at the same time, right? And I think the telephone is also on that list, as far as Alexander Bell. I think somebody in France invented the telephone at the same time. And nobody's telling each other yet all these inventions that hit the world in different spots at the same time. Is it, something that's been out, nobody's thought of for thousands of generations, and all of a sudden you now have this place. And there's something to the fact that humanity gets to the place where it can handle a higher thought, right? You're not going to think of radio waves if you don't even know what electricity is. So it's, and there is that growth in consciousness that then does come into a whole different discussion of collective intent on, is it possible to actually improve our consciousness on purpose, which is a whole, that's kind of where I went with mine, was this. Go ahead, Matt.
Well, I'll just say, I think it's really interesting when you think about what the U.S. exports. I think of three things typically. I think of financial products, I think of war, and I think of culture. And then it makes you wonder, how much of an impact, our culture has had on the entire world, especially since mass media became a thing, and how much that balances out the other exports that we have. That's all.
I'll never forget. You guys remember the game Civilization? Sid Meier's Civilization? And I can't remember which version I was playing. I think it was version 4.
The version where you realize it's 2:00 in the morning. Like, crap, I've been playing this for 16 hours and I've taken one bathroom break.
I used to love that game. But I'll never forget, one of the ways you could take over the world was through your culture. As you got further on, your culture about borders would spread. And that was the only time I was ever actually able to win the game, was by spreading my culture. And it was through everything, through the arts, through media, through everything like that. And just, you'd be next to these neighboring cities, and all of a sudden you would find, in the next turn, that city suddenly belonged to you because it had your culture. It was pretty cool.
That's what the Greeks did.
Well, that is honestly what the Romans did.
Yeah.
With the apostolos.
Actually.
Oh dear.
I think with a bird
the
chiming in,
Roman-
I'm not sure.
The Romans took the Greeks' culture and spread it around.
True.
Hard.
Technically, the Greeks.
But that's why. But that is why. It's very biblical concept. The apostle or the apostolos. When the Romans figured out that if they took over a city and they maintained it through war and armies and had soldiers, eventually it just got too expensive, and so they'd have to pull their soldiers out. And within months of pulling the soldiers out, it could have been in their territory for 100 years. But the moment they pulled their soldiers out, they would have an uprising. And so they realized instead of using soldiers and force to keep people under control, they would send in an apostolos, which was a ship loaded with poets and artists and politicians and philosophers and all of the culture of Rome. And the goal was that the idea would be that once the Roman emperor would come and put their foot on the, lay their foot on the shore of that particular city, that it would feel like home. It would feel like Rome, because now this place felt exactly the same. But that's a whole nother subject for another day, I think.
And it's also a option to do in Civilization. So you can over there. And
Well, that's why you have so much, so much of the architecture in the Middle East, all these ruins and stuff like that. They're basically Roman architecture or Greek or whatever, but it all looks the same.
Well, in talking about the cultural thing, the poets and the musicians and all that stuff, it just makes me think about the power of intention behind our current, like the U.S. Movies and all that kind of stuff. Like, there's definitely a different group of people at the top of all of that stuff than what's, say, in the Midwest, perhaps, or like what's leading the intention of the country really is also the culture, who leads the culture with the movies and all that kind of the entertainment, basically. So yeah, you can kind of see how intention is everywhere. The question is, again, I pose the question, is it how much of it is conscious intention and how much of it is subconscious intention? Like, are there actually, you probably have an opinion about this, but are there people sitting up there like, okay, now we're going to put this and this in the movies so that we direct everyone to start thinking this way? And yes, I'm sure. I was
actually just going to ask that if, because that does bring up the question, is it an evil conspiracy? And there's,
right.
The Bloombergs. And yes, obviously we would say, yes, there is a conspiracy. But then along with that, you do get ideas coming forward, and you'll have two movies coming out at the same time, both with the same subject. Was that a conspiracy? Maybe. Was that the consciousness of where our country is just moving us naturally?
I see
what's coming.
Oh yeah, I see stuff all the time that I'm like, that they were not connected at all, but in the collective consciousness,
right,
clearly see stuff coming to the
What
forefront.
I was going to say, though, actually, in a more sinister point here.
Well, let's not leave the sinister.
No, we can't. You had, and correct me if I'm wrong, you had said something about the fact that Hollywood makes way more money with movies that are family friendly than they do with movies that are rated R or whatever. And crap, my idea just kind of broke down somewhat.
So you corrected yourself.
I did. No. Well, what I was going to say was, if these ideas, we'll call like rated R stuff being more extreme, even though the reason why it broke down was because there is a lot of this kind of exposure of let's just call it questionable ideas that happen within some children's movies.
Aladdin.
I don't know. I wouldn't know.
Oh,
But
dude,
you
one
would
of the opening songs in that, you're like, Disney hates Middle Eastern people. Okay.
Well, I was
What's
just
that?
gonna say one in the Beauty and the Beast movie, there was a part that I heard people having problems with too. But anyways, the idea, and actually, I heard this in a podcast too, that all these movies, the ones that get nominated for Oscars and stuff like that, nobody really watches them. Nobody really cares about them.
It's true.
They just have some sort of social whatever benefit, and people are like, "Oh, this is such a great movie," and yeah, and here's have an Oscar. We're gonna pat ourselves in the back for being so
Forward
progressive,
thinking.
if you will. But anyways, long story short, the money is not in these kind of movies. So if they would be out there to make money, there would not be that many of these movies. Yeah. But the fact that these movies continue to come out, and it almost feels like there's way more of these kinds of questionable movies than there are of quote-unquote non-questionable movies, then to me it seems like there is a focused intention. There is something that is trying to erode, trying to chafe, if you will, at the middle America way of seeing things, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Done.
I think it's interesting. We all went and studied intention, and the goal was to try to get at intention from a group angle. And by a show of hands, or not show of hands because it's a podcast and mostly audio, who eventually kind of came around to more of a study on collective consciousness?
Me.
Oh. Yeah.
Right. Because we've been hovering around collective consciousness more than intention. And again, Christina, you keep asking what's conscious versus subconscious. And I think the subconscious is, well, I'm certain, all studies, all of all the different fields of science prove that the subconscious mind is where the true creative capacity of humanity is. And so we can consciously try to spread freedom. It's like, oh, such and such country just discovered more oil. I think they need some freedom. We say that that's what our goal is, but there's a subconscious thing going on with the U.S. And its modern version of culture spreading, and as well as the war that we export and the finances. Like, there is a absolute, I don't know, I would call it a, dare I say, arrogance?
Our actions speak louder than our words.
A confidence?
Confidence is a nice way of saying it.
In how much the world needs what we think. And yeah, being, mostly, I would say we're middle America. Most of us on this podcast, we just want to live our lives and kind of do what we do. And if we want to change the world, it has nothing to do with control and has everything to do with freedom and showing people the true divinity within themselves. But by and large, I would say our politicians, our bankers, our our entertainers, there is a very, very intentional power struggle going on that is working. And it is one of those things there. I do question their intent. I think the intent of most of the people in Washington, D.C. is completely abhorrent. And I would say most of the people in Hollywood is equally abhorrent. And there's a lot of that coming out in the news these days with the Epstein Island and all of that other stuff. But I mean, all you got to do is look at the costumes of people in the Super Bowl halftime show, or the different symbols that they use in the Flash. You guys remember Beyonce with her triangle thingy. You can see it.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen pictures.
I remember her for face.
Right.
Sasha Fury, whatever it is.
But there's so much imagery and symbology that is consistent throughout, and all of the arts, including movies, including the music industry, including political symbology. Even looking at our money, the all-seeing eye on top of the pyramid. There's a lot of intent underneath that most of the American public, we kind of play with, we play into, we buy into it, thinking on one conscious level and not realizing what's going on the deeper level.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I was looking at when we're still looking at, intention in countries, I was looking at what made rich countries rich and poor countries poor. What do they have in common? And one of the things with wealthy countries was actually that they have little to no religion. And I was like, but the exception is the United States. But the United States...
Because we have the right one.
Right. That's my point. No. Is that we have a materialistic religion. A lot of religions say, get rid of all your stuff, be poor and all that, but not the United States. The United States is more about, is okay with getting more and obtaining more and growing. And you can still be a Christian and be a corrupt politician. And that's how our country is being run. That's the people that are leading and guiding it. So we're kind of an anomaly in the world of being religious and being powerful. Yeah.
That's really interesting. I came across a study, or a grant that was awarded to, I think it was the University of Copenhagen, just because the rise in nationalism, the rise in just rising polarization between, I guess the two different sides of the bird, if you will. And just to answer the question this grant was going for was, who are we collectively? And I don't know, I think, obviously spirituality is a gigantic part of that. That's why we do. That's why why we focus on it so much on the website and this podcast. But it's got to play a role. That underlying identity of who we are, of what we believe about ourselves, whether it's that materialism's okay, whether that's materialism is of the devil. I don't know. I think about the vast spiritual transformation I've undergone in the last half decade or so, and like the questions I've begun to ask myself, like, if I want to be a good person and rich people are evil, when my finances begin to turn towards trending upwards, what am I going to do? That's going to, am I going to stay on that path and become an evil person? That's what I believe, that evil people are, rich people are evil, or am I going to sabotage my finances so that I don't fall into that evil category? I don't know. I think definitely the underlying beliefs play a huge part in who we are and what we do.
For sure. So for me, I tried to find information on kind of this collective intent, and I'm one of those, I'm cursed with the the need to ask, so why or how, or I kind of kept coming around to this, like, okay, so if the collective intent keeps producing this fruit, where's the problem and how do you fix it? And that's where my hook came in, said you can't have a green forest without green trees, just like you can't have world peace without peaceful people. And so there is a measure of start with yourself and help, a few people around you. I mean, that the 100 monkeys thing is true on both ends. Mm-hmm. Without the first monkey teaching his friends, you don't get to the 100th monkey. But at some point, the 100th monkey proves that you flip a switch. Mm-hmm. And that there is that moment where there is a collective reality. And so I think I would dare say that we're in that 6-year period, of that 100 monkey experiment where we have a lot of people waking up to the fact that religion by and large is bullcrap, that politicians, regardless of the flag they fly, are untrustworthy, that the media is full of lies, and just there's so much the internet and the tools available to us today. I mean, the world is becoming smaller every day, and the spreading of ideas is just growing at an exponential pace. And if you've done any study on the law of exponential growth, I think we're kind of right at that base of where this thing starts to, they call it the hockey stick, right? Where it takes a long time to grow, and all of a sudden it just goes straight up, because exponential growth does that. And, I think I heard a figure that if you started with $1 and you doubled it every day, you'd be a millionaire in 28 days.
Yes.
But you don't realize it's literally, or another one I listened to was, if you took a water dropper inside of a stadium, like a baseball stadium or something like that, and you doubled the size of the drops, that you would have it you'd be 95% of the way there, or something like that, in a few hours. But by the time you realized that the next drop was going to come and fill the stadium, it'd be too late. And so this idea is that, when you double that dollar, and within 28 days you have over $1 million, you don't realize that last day you added $500 million, right? And so exponential growth and exponential consciousness, I think, is very much that monkey, the 100th monkey, where you get those last few clicks and then suddenly everything changes. And it feels like we're starting to feel that curve go up. I know so many people that are starting their own podcasts, that are trying to get into this personal development journey and growing on purpose. And there is an intent that I think a lot of people have carried for years and years and years, and it's starting to find its way into the public eye more and more. And hopefully in the next, 5 or 6 years, we will see that click over, that shift. But the question then becomes, what do you do with the existing structures? What do you do with the existing intent?
If I could frame this question for anybody in a very epic way, how much do you guys think that the changing of the ages plays into this? Whether it's on a subconscious level, conscious level, we are entering a different age, and the old age is passing away. How much does that impact this stuff? Where the previous age, trying to stay in power, the old power systems trying to do their thing, the new age, those things beginning to pile up exponentially in that favor. What do you guys think about that?
Austin's purposefully trying to keep his mouth shut for a little bit there.
Yes.
To me, I feel like it, for sure, it has to. There's no way it doesn't play into it. That's about all I have to say about it. So.
Well, Austin was just talking about all the, all the voices that are coming out, that there's people that are putting out media. I mean, if you think about it, you have the old media and you have the new media, and the new media is growing like crazy. You have so many people, like Austin just said, making podcasts and so on and so forth. This isn't media that is regulated by anybody. This isn't media that has an agenda, if you will. Bigger agenda or whatever. It could, but whatever. These are people that are putting themselves out there, and I think that by and large we're gonna see more positivity coming from these things. This homemade media, if you will, than you will from the canned, boring, bloated media that we have, mainstream media, whatever you want to call it nowadays. And these are messages that won't be able to be squashed, won't be able to be, I guess you do have YouTube and Google, but
trying to squash stuff.
Yeah, but in a way, I feel like more voices of more people out there are going to bring people together, and we're going to see that we are all human, that we aren't, terrorists, or we aren't greedy Americans or whatever.
Speak for
We're not
yourself.
all greedy Americans or all terrorists or so on and so forth. And I think that'll bring people together, and it's a product of this new age, I feel like.
Mm-hmm.
So I was trying to figure out, as I was thinking, I was like, wait, is that like a chicken and the egg thing? Like the stars came first, but we're creating our own intention, but we all know subconsciously what the stars are telling us, so we're entering this new age. And I don't know, maybe Austin can expound on that, but I think in some ways we want to look at, the universe doing its thing, and a lot of people want to align themselves with that, and then other people are like, no, I'm creating my own reality and I'm doing my own thing and I'm following the universe here, but it's all connected anyway. And so to answer your question, Matt, yes, I think it has everything to do with that. We're all riding this giant wave together, the stars and the media, it's all moving in the same direction.
So on a metaphysical level, there is a bit more to understanding what the stars and the ages are really doing. And I firmly believe that, science has not yet figured out how to study thought, right? How to empirically study thought. And all we've been able to do is figure out how to think about thought. And yet, this very subject, intent and global consciousness, it's an exercise in doing our best to unpack how important are our thoughts, how important and how useful, and what do they do. And so I would, when you look at certain things such as the 100th monkey, you realize there is something very mystical, quote unquote, and it's only mystical because we don't understand it yet, right? I don't believe there's anything known as magic. There's nothing supernatural. It's all natural, and it's only considered magic or mystical because we haven't figured out a way to explain it. Because everything is natural. So there is a natural way in which a thought goes from one monkey to another, right? But then there's another natural way when it goes from one island of monkeys to another island of monkeys. And that is the part that scares the crap out of science, because they can't empirically study it. They can't poke at it and prod at it. And I would say that the ages very much plays in that world, where we don't realize, so everything is vibration, everything is energy. And if you want to, people think it's woo-woo, but, when they talk about we're coming into a different frequency because, we've crossed into the Pleiades plasma belt, and there's a different energy, and then you've got the stars that are actually shining on us, and through the light of the sun and everything like that, that it's a different energy, a different frequency, a different vibration. And so that mankind is thinking different thoughts than we've ever thought. We are, if you back out of the weirdness of it and you look at the evidence of what's coming out of people's mouths, and you look at the evidence of what inventions and ideas are coming into existence, I don't think there's a whole lot of, you can't really argue with something has changed. Something is very different. And you could say, well, it's because we have cell phones and the internet. Yes, but we have cell phones and the internet because somebody had an idea, right? Where did that idea come from? Where do your ideas come from? Mm-hmm. They come from somewhere that's very difficult to point at. And so when you have an entire world of ideas being born every day, in 8 billion people, and there's just going to be more people, so there's just going to be more ideas, and it's only going to get faster. Again, it's exponential growth. I would say that, I touched on the metaphysical a bit, and yes, that is very much part of the answer, but just the mere fact that we, as Joni has, the chicken or the egg, well, is it the first monkey or the 100th monkey? Mm. Where does it start? And it's a both and. It is a feedback loop, as you said, Matt, where we are we are feeding back to the realm of spirit, and spirit is then feeding back to us. And it is a never-ending framing where spirit frames matter and matter frames spirit. And I think as we grow, then the speed of our growth improves. The question is, if the ages were laid out, thousands of years ago, where does that knowledge come from? Well, it comes from a realm that's outside of time and space. So now you're getting, predestination versus foreknowledge versus whatever. It's all part of it. It's all interconnected, but that is as clearly as I can get into it in 3 minutes.
So I have a number of things to get in here, and it goes in the realm of sciencey stuff, which I never feel like I can I never understand it super well. So I always have to write all my notes down and read my notes so I make sure I get it right. But some of the stuff you were saying, I feel like kind of ties into this. Is anyone familiar with Dr. William Tiller? Have you heard that name?
I know the name. It's about.
Okay.
That's all I know.
I would imagine you probably would have heard the name because he has similar circles to some of the other people that we have on the Epic and stuff. So he was a professor. I don't think he's currently a professor there, but he was a professor at Stanford for a long time, and he did a bunch of studies. He coined the term. Where is the term? Okay, psychoenergetic science, which is consciousness and science, like consciousness science, basically. And a quote by him, he said, in his opinion, consciousness is a byproduct of spirit entering denser matter, which I think is interesting to ponder. So the studies that he did, he says there's 2 unique levels of physical reality: electric atom molecule level versus magnetic information wave level. And they are not working together until intention is put into it. And then they become essentially they become connected. And he has
electromagnetic, yeah.
He has graphs of it and stuff. And so the physical reality that humans, from what he says, that humans' intention affects is the magnetic information wave level. And so the studies that he's done, he has used some sort of electric, let me see. He imprinted, quote unquote, imprinted electrical devices with a specific intention by experienced meditators. So he had a group of they could manage their inner stuff really well. He had them meditate a specific intention onto these devices, and then he would ship the devices somewhere else and put them near whatever it was that they were trying to affect and turn them on. And what they were able to do was, for example, increase or lower the pH of water by 1 point. And for reference, it's possible to measure 1/100th or even 1/1000th of a degree of change in pH levels. So that was a pretty significant change. And then they were also able to affect the growing of larvae at a 30% increased rate and the killing of bacteria at a 30% increased rate. And this was by intention put into a device. It made me think of, side note, it made me think of was it Paul's handkerchiefs or whatever that they would place on people for healing and stuff like that.
Or religious staff. Yeah.
Yeah. So these are the kinds of things that Western religion particularly has been very oh, woo-woo, demon stuff, or whatever. But it's like they're proving it out. all this stuff is getting proved scientifically, so it makes us feel a little bit safer, I guess. I don't know. And another interesting thing is that when they were doing these experiments, when this intent experiment or these intent experiments were repeated again and again in the same space, it eventually became a permanent thing. Essentially, the laws of physics in that space no longer operated as they did before. Like, they were changing how the laws of physics operated, and they then could remove the machine from the space, and the space would continue giving them the same effects with the experiments that they were doing. So I thought that was really interesting to consider how, like, we all know, like, there's different energies in different spaces and that kind of stuff, but like the kinds of things that are done in those spaces over a long period of time, it's a real thing. It's affecting actual reality. It's not just like some spiritual thing that like some ethereal thing. It's literal, which I think is really cool to be able to see stuff proved out scientifically. Let me see if I had anything. I think that's the main stuff that I wanted to get to with the sciencey things. But I'll put like links to videos and stuff in either our article or the main episode article. But I don't know. It just makes me excited when stuff starts getting proved, when quote unquote seemingly like spiritual woo-woo stuff starts getting proved out in a very interesting way.
I heard about both of those studies actually in the book The Intention Experiment.
Okay, yeah. I never got around to reading that book.
Yeah, Lynn McTaggart. Yeah.
Lynn McTaggart wrote The Intention Experiment, and it's very sciencey, the entire book.
It's pretty dry.
It's fairly dry, but it's fascinating if you want to read. The whole book is experiments on intention and how it's been proved out. And those ones in particular that you were talking about, my mind also went to Lucky Charms. You think of like Lucky Rabbit's feet and soldiers that would go off to war and would have their lucky picture. And it's putting that intent that they would be protected by it or it would bring you luck. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this proves this out. It's where you put your intention, where you put your belief ends up manifesting in the physical world. It's pretty fascinating.
Well, and a lot of those things, like a lucky rabbit's foot, eventually you realize the rabbit's foot isn't lucky, but it is a focus of something to focus on.
Right. But the item itself can hold energy.
Right.
Yes, apparently.
And affect the space around you. But yeah, mostly, I mean, all you have to have is the belief in your head, and that gives it credibility. But your belief then creates a change in the material world around you. So I've heard stories about, someone with their lucky rabbit foot giving it to someone else. Well, is it the luck that's been instilled in the rabbit foot that then gives the next person, or is it their belief in what they said? Can go both ways. It probably is both, but
true.
So anybody who's listening to this episode, and I will say quantum physics and now different sciences. What was the name of that science?
Psychoenergetic science.
Psychoenergetic science.
Consciousness science, essentially.
Yeah, and they're doing experiments to prove that. So spirituality is loaded with ideas around intent. What do you think prayer is?
Right.
What do you think worship is? Mm-hmm. What do you think having a sanctuary is?
Yeah.
Right. All of those things. It's this is the sacred building. This is the sacred time. This is talking to the air quietly or out loud, and it's supposed to change my life. I mean. We have these practices, and spirituality has been loaded with intention-based power for thousands of years since the beginning. And science came and said, this is a load of crap.
Right.
Well, now science is over and over and over and over and over proving that every one of those practices and every one of those spiritual things actually has almost 100% validity in the quantum field. And so if that's kind of a new concept to you, that science is proving this stuff out. Just check out people like Lynn McTaggart. She's got one called The Intention Experiment, I think, the field, and then one called The Power of Eight, which is about group intention for healing people. Check out Deepak Chopra. Check out Greg Braden. Check out Bruce Lipton or Joe Dispenza. There are scientists who have, I mean, some of their stories, their personal stories are pretty crazy, because you've got these quantum physicists and these, cell biologists and different. Lynn McTaggart's technically, she was a reporter, but they have these experiences where they realize there's something real here, and my old view of science doesn't explain it. And I like Bruce Lipton's story the most, because he talks about the day he realized that the cells he was studying, they were getting their signals from outside the cell. And he had this aha moment where he realized that his true self was outside of his body. And that is the electromagnetic field around you. That one of my favorite exercises I've started doing, I got from a book called The Power of Decision. And he says, he talks about closing your eyes and then starting to try to feel the edge of your face. And where does your face stop? And obviously, if you've got wind or something in your face, you can feel it. But if you don't, you realize, oh my gosh, I can't really tell where my nose stops. And that's when you start to realize that you aren't your body, right? That you are your mind, and your mind is outside of your body. And those ideas are starting to be the ideas that are infiltrating human consciousness. And when you start seeing science prove out spiritual tradition, I think you're absolutely going to see the world change. And now you're back at the epic, the new story, the new age of living. And there's going to be some growing pains. The old guard is not going to give up easily. At the end of every age, there's usually a sizable catastrophe of society and civilization, and it has to kind of rebuild. But nonetheless, it will rebuild and it will continue. And, maybe, who knows, maybe this time we've got enough consciousness that the transition doesn't have to be horrendous. We'll see. We'll see who wins that one. But the old guard is not going to give up easily. And hopefully we will be here for the other side of it.
I mean, just to tag on, science-wise with, you're not knowing where your nose ends. We've known for quite some time that there's, when it comes to a molecule, like so much of that molecule is empty space. And so it's not like everything's just packed together really tight. And that's what makes me is a lot of empty space, probably up here too. But I think we're getting to that point in the show though, where we should probably go around the circle before we go too long here. So you got anything?
Well, Jen's not here. She usually goes first.
Correct.
Right? And so I guess I go first.
Just keep talking for the whole show.
I like that Jen goes first. That way I'm like, okay, crap, what do I got to do?
Now you're in the hot seat. Know how she feels.
I don't know. I think I probably just would say, if you're gonna try to change the world, change yourself, and intent is the place to start, because I do think a lot of people live without intention. I think a lot of people go on autopilot. They let life happen to them, and that is an intentionless life, essentially. And for me, this study for me sent me down the path a lot towards studying meditation, which was maybe we should do a whole episode on that, because I found a lot of great information and kind of a feeling intuitively like that's something that I'm supposed to look more into at this point in my life. But yeah, live on purpose, and that requires intention. So you should probably do that.
Yeah, interesting you bring up meditation, because that's actually was going to be one of the things that I looked at, but we didn't get to talk about, was the Maharishi effect, which sounds super fancy. But essentially it was just the idea, this Maharishi Mahesh, say that 10 times fast. Yogi, yes. Who taught meditation, and kind of came up with the discovery that if you could get just 1% of, say, a city's population meditating together with focused intention on, lowering crime or increasing happiness, something like that, just 1% of the population can actually make a measurable difference.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they did some of this in the Intention experiment book, but just how it doesn't take that many. 1% is not that many to make a noticeable change, but it does take the individual. Start with yourself, set your own intentions, and then that compounds and can affect the world. But so, yeah.
In the same vein, think about what you are thinking. Think about what the voices in your head are saying about yourself, and whether you're believing that somehow you are a victim of something, or if you are just take a moment and run your thoughts through, shine a light on your thoughts. What are you thinking? What things are you believing? What things are you taking for granted? And you'll find that will basically do a lot of what Austin was saying. Just changing your beliefs, raising the level of your beliefs, and making yourself a better person.
My conclusions, or my whatever, are two quotes that caught my attention, also from Dr. William Tiller. The first being, "Our future lies in harnessing the energies that lie hidden in the spaces between the particles, atoms, molecules, planets, stars, and galaxies of the physical universe." And then the other quote is that people only become conscious to things as they give meaning to them. So it's something that I'm going to be pondering, like, what am I giving meaning to? And again, being intentional about what I choose to give meaning to.
Right on. I think, to kind of tag on to what Austin said, we change this world one person at a time. And I think it's important that we take inventory of ourselves, that we try to understand who we are and how we got to where we are now. And then when you kind of have that fuller picture, then you can realize that when you come upon a choice in your life, that, or a place of decision, that you have a choice, that you're not just some person who has to go through the motions, but you can, understand all the things that are coming at you, all the intent from every which angle, and the collective identity that surrounds you. And then you can realize, I have choice. And it takes knowing yourself, though. It takes a lot of effort to get to that place. I think Psyche was a huge tool for me. It exposed a lot of beliefs that I held that I didn't realize that I held. So beyond that, I think, going back a while back, Austin was talking about just how we travel through this universe, or as the universe grows and we travel through the story in the stars, essentially. It kind of made me wonder about that part in Ecclesiastes where Solomon is talking about, nothing new is under the sun. But how does that change as we travel through the story in the stars? Maybe I'm just making connections that don't need to be made or should ever be made, but just got me wondering. And I think, I don't know, every new day is a chance for something new to happen. So we create it. Mm-hmm. That said, follow us on all those social media platforms at Epic Ideas. Hit up our Patreon, support the show if you got the cash. If you're looking for some good merch, man, we're always putting out stuff on our mostly monthlies, which I think is coming up here soon. Well, I guess who knows with the order, but we put these out. But yeah, every link that we put out there for products is something we believe in. Nobody's coming to us, approaching us, saying, "Hey, can you sell this for us?" No, it's just something that we believe in. Yeah, right. Yes, yet. But it's just things that we believe in that we think are good ads for your life if you have the little extra buck. buying those products helps us out. That said, thank you so much for listening today and getting to this point in the show. It's really cool to know that we've got an audience that can not only just hear these ideas, but then, they're primed to have a greater conversation with people in their spheres and then collectively change the intent of the whole world. So
Let's do it.
let's do it. Take care.